Welcome to RSA Conference 2023. We're recording live from Broadcast Alley here in Moscone West. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with Patrick Vandenberg, Director of Product at Invicti Security. Hello, Patrick.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me here today.
Wonderful to have you here this afternoon. And what I wanted to, I host the Application Security Weekly, and you have an AppSec, or an Application Security Indicator report. What have you been indicating? Tell me more.
We do. Great way to open it. So Invicti we've been doing this report for 9 years. And actually there's two flavors to it. So the spring report is database, so mining the data from our customers, all the non-private data, of course. And then the fall edition is survey-based. So we survey the industry, and then so there's a different perspective.
So internal, external,
kind of. Exactly. Yeah. So in this one, 9th year, we've done this report and just launched. And you know that the theme of this one came out to be scan more, fix more, reduce your risk. And I'm sure we'll chat about that in a little bit, but. The data came from 1.7 million scans and over 1,700 customers. So we were able to expand that data set for this year. So from that, we feel we've got some good insights from it.
There is. And scan more, that doesn't sound necessarily new to me. I think I've heard scan more for 10 years, 20 years. But there's also, I think, a nuance in there. We're not just supposed to scan more just for the sake of scanning. There's a benefit to this. Tell us why.
Yeah, there is. So in the big takeaways part of the report, or the perspective on the report, we saw scanning increasing. And you're spot on, right? Like the idea of scanning more, that's been around for a long time. And if you can mature to a point where your scanning is so frequent, we're approaching the application security version of monitoring, right? Like you're shortening that window of exposure, shortening that window of lack of visibility towards an almost monitoring state. You're in a much secure position. But our main takeaway here was we saw scanning frequency rise on a number of different dimensions, right? Both in total scans, but scans per target. So any way you slice it, it's going up. And that drove us to also seeing vulnerabilities, severe vulnerabilities ticking down. So it's the first time, even though the notion's not new, it's the first time we have data to support that premise. And that, for us, was a significant takeaway.
That's a nice indicator, to be quite honest. And I think you mentioned 1,700 customers. There's got to be something that's, in addition, like what leads them to have that scanning either be more frequent, or that scanning turns into, in practice, in actuality, fewer vulns? Is this like a maturity thing? What's an angle here?
Yeah, so there's a couple of conversation points in that question. So and if you walk through the process with me for a second here, you scan more, you're going to ultimately find more vulnerabilities.
Devs are going to be busy.
Regardless of what the trend is, you're going to find more. And as you find more, what happens? Well, the collaboration between security and development gets more reps. Developers get more reps seeing a particular vulnerability or a set of vulnerability. And just like an athlete developing a new skill, the more reps they get, the better they get. You put a new worker on an assembly line, the more reps they get, the more efficient, productive they're going to get. Well, it's the same thing for a developer. If they've seen a remote code execution vulnerability for the 5th time in a week and a half, they're going to, ideally recognize that doesn't need to be in their code anymore. But they're going to get better at the remediation. They're going to get faster at it. They're going to learn and understand it. So the idea is scan more, find more, your processes get better, more efficient, and then the vulnerability starts to decline, and you reduce your risk.
Yeah, I like that processes aspect too, because I think, hopefully, I don't think you've said this at all, this isn't AppSec coming out as the drill sergeant yelling at developers to do 20 push-ups. That's the type of reps, that's the exercise. If 20 years ago we were saying scan more, that's probably why we failed to fix a lot of vulns, because we were just saying fix everything. So how do you see that in the modern apps now?
So, there's a great conversation there, because 20 years ago, just scanning once was a big deal, and that fostered a lot of friction between AppSec, who knew what needed to happen, and devs saying, no, I'm building apps over here. What are you talking about? Security is not my issue. That's yours. Well, we've progressed a long way, but unfortunately, we're now in an age with cloud-native application development and velocity of apps and updates of apps that we're at this point where we've got to shorten this window of release from the developer's hands.
Gotcha.
The longer that reaches back to the developer, the more friction there's liable to be in these fast-paced development release cycles. So if we can automate that scanning back into CI/CD pipeline,
Gotcha.
and get a like a real-world functional security check back to the developers more in their day-to-day life cycle, we're in a much better position to collaborate, engage, and support security at the same time, not disrupt and support what dev's mission is. So we think that's the direction.
That makes sense. I think you kind of answered this following question I've got already, but I'm going to re-ask it to poke it a little bit differently. You've got this report. A VP of engineering looks at it, or a CISO looks at it, or some leader on the AppSec side. I don't think the takeaway is we should just be scanning more. That's not what you're saying, but what should they be actually taking away from this report?
So I'm going to bring up this term shift left.
Okay.
All
right.
And
all right.
with full recognition that
I haven't rolled my eyes yet.
Yeah. With full recognition that many have gone past that single dimension of shift left, and it's the infinity loop. So full understanding, but for the purpose of understanding the concept that we're trying to share here, let's just simplify it down to
fair point.
We're trying to get DAST scanning, so web applications, API scanning, further left in that initial cycle, where it's more organic for developers to see code, get their SBOMs, and let's get a functional check on the security side of things. Yeah. You're much more effective to do that. So we're seeing an uptick in shift left. For DAST methodologies, but we're also seeing more of a shift right. And people might say, well, what are you talking about? You can't get more right than production. Well, a production test 20 years ago was just a single check, and it was set and forget, done, never looking at it again. Today, what we're talking about is that getting to continuous monitoring. So not just an annual or quarterly compliance check, but if I can get that application, which is changing on a very rapid basis, if I can get a weekly, and in some edge cases maybe daily, check on it because it's a very critical application, then I've almost got a production monitoring state of my web assets, and which as we know, the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report, web,
lots of web in there.
So 70% of the incidents started with web assets as the initial attack vector.
Right.
So I think this is a maturation of the application security space, and although, yes, conceptually people don't like shift left, DAST shifting both left and shift right helps the VP of engineering in the long run.
And I think the way you position that too is that security is actually accommodating development in this case. Or following along. They say development is releasing every day. How come we're only doing our compliance scan once per quarter or once every month? We should be scanning along with that.
Yeah, that age-old concept of, is it security driving this or is it compliance driving this? And we did see prior areas where it was security and then compliance came along and that's what was driving the business. Now it's both. Like you can have both here. But I think one thing that's been true is you're only successful if there's a partnership between AppSec and the development organization. And so it absolutely has to be collaborative. Neither one is going to be successful without it. So it has to be kind of an open, positive mindset.
So then looking forward either to the fall or maybe even next year, the 10th year of this, or let's say the 19th year of this, how optimistic are you for the future? Do you see this extending these trends into something particularly interesting?
Well, I mean, in our industry slice, we saw manufacturing as a huge outlier, like about 3x scanning rates of other industries. And you look at pandemic and going digital, and so there was a rush to exposing some of the functionality in the supply chain into the digital spectrum. You can see a need to apply security for something like that. It could be coming out of Log4Shell era where we saw an elevation of scanning rates and stuff. Yeah. But for whatever reason there, we did see a positive surge forward, and we saw a subset of manufacturing customers adopt the scanning and CI/CD pipeline. So looking forward, if we see more of that, then hopefully we'll see more of this, what we saw in this report, which was a 19% downtick in severe vulnerabilities. That's a positive step.
Music to my ears. Love
Fingers crossed that's what we start to see in the 10th and 11th edition.
So is there something, looking at the report then, is there something the other industries could be taking from manufacturing, or is there another external influence or way they can catch up that 3x as well?
Yeah, I mean, as soon as you adopt automated testing, you'll catch up pretty quickly. But it's the decision to get there.
Yeah.
And so we're hoping there's a bit of a leader effect from the manufacturing industry that we'll continue to talk about. But I think there's about 7 industries that one thing that I thought was quite notable they had a 4-year steady annual increase in their scanning activity.
Okay, so not a blip. Yeah.
That's not a blip. There was 2 industries that were the inverse of that. We haven't been able to figure that one out. We'll continue to monitor that side. But when you have that many industries, and not erratic, like steady year-over-year increases, that tells us something, that they're on the right track. And as more of the enterprise segment starts to adopt that automation, I think we're going to see more momentum on that trend.
No, that's really cool. And I wondered, it would be cool to see what the next Verizon DBIR looks like from their industry overlap as well, because everybody's got the web apps, but hopefully everybody has the secure web apps too.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the ideal.
So there is now those critical vulns have gone away. I just want to ask: is there still one that's just hanging out there that won't quite disappear, or is there? You mentioned like RCEs, or something like that.
That's one of the call outs. So teams only have the bandwidth really to focus on the critical and high severity vulns. We know that. So the prevalence of the mediums and lows are high because nobody's paying attention to it. But they're still there. They still need attention. And in the case of remote code execution, really low prevalence.
Okay.
So on one hand, somebody could dismiss it, but it's critical vuln. So it only takes one to blow up a business. And the concerning point about it, even though prevalence is really low, is that there is a steady uptick for the 4 years. And a 40% surge awful low levels. So, somebody could say statistically that's not really impactful, but when you start to back it up and say, okay, it's increased every year for 4 years, then it's worth noting, it's worth paying attention to, and it's our duty to call that out and keep an eye on that.
Yeah, so I guess a CISO, rather than having to practice writing up, we take your security seriously, they could we read your report seriously, and we'll take some of its recommendations to heart, perhaps.
Yes, hopefully.
Well, Patrick, this has been a great conversation, and you and I, in fact, are going to talk again in June on the Application Security Weekly podcast, so there's a lot more here to unpack.
We are looking forward to it.
Yeah, looking forward to speaking with you some more, Patrick, and thanks again for joining us today.
Thanks, Mike.
If you're interested in learning more about Invicti Security, visit securityweekly.com/InvictiRSAC. And stick around, we've got a lot more coming on the live stream.